In 1876, Bloody Knife stood tall in a fringed buckskin jacket, his left hand gripping a rifle, his right steadying his horse. Sweat streaked his weathered face as he rode with Custer's 7th Cavalry. A gunshot pierced the air, and he dropped dead, only 10 miles from Gall, the Sioux warrior who killed his brothers. 30 years earlier, history records his death at the Little Bighorn, where 263 soldiers fell in under an hour, a battle that shocked the nation. Born in 1840 to an Arikara mother and Hunkpapa Sioux father, Bloody Knife faced a brutal youth. By 1860, smallpox had slashed the Arikara from 30,000 to 6,000, leaving his people broken. Gall's attack that year, beating him with a coup stick and spilling his blood, lit a fire of revenge that burned until his end. Yet he chose to scout for the U.S. Army, guiding 1,000 troops in the 1873 Yellowstone Expedition against his own kin. Historian D. Brown calls him a man torn by loyalty and loss, a native voice drowned in the clash of empires. His story mirrors the fate of over 300 native scouts who died serving the army between 1866 and 1876. So why did this Arikara warrior, after losing 80% of his tribe to disease, fight for the nation that claimed his lands? Did his 30-year hunt for Gall blind him to the 2 million acres his people lost by 1870? Bloody Knife, caught between worlds. Bloody Knife was not a typical name you would find in the history books of the American frontier. He stood out because of who he was and what he did. Born around 1840, he came into a world that was already tearing itself apart. His mother was Arikara, part of a tribe that lived along the Missouri River in what is now North Dakota. His father was Hunkpapa Sioux, from a powerful group that roamed the Great Plains. These two tribes did not get along. The Arikara and the Sioux had been enemies for generations, fighting over land and resources. This mix of blood made Bloody Knife a man, with one foot in two very different worlds. The time he was born into was chaotic. The United States was pushing west, fast. By 1840, settlers had already started crossing the plains. In huge numbers, the Oregon Trail saw about 1,000 people travel it that year alone, and that number would grow to over 50,000 by the 1850s. The U.S. government wanted more land for these settlers, so they built forts and signed treaties with Native American tribes. One big treaty was the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. It promised peace between tribes and with the U.S., setting aside land for the Sioux and others. But the government broke it within years, letting settlers and railroads move in. This caused trouble, especially with the Sioux, who fought back hard. Bloody Knife grew up in this mess. His Arikara side tied him to a people who often worked with the U.S. government. The Arikara, along with the Mandan and Hidatsa, made up the three affiliated tribes. By the 1840s, their numbers had dropped from around 30,000 to just 6,000 because of smallpox epidemics, like the one in 1837 that killed over half their population. Weakened, they saw the U.S. Army as a way to survive against stronger enemies like the Sioux. But his Sioux side linked him to a tribe that resisted the U.S. at every turn. The Sioux controlled huge stretches of the plains, and by the 1860s, they were clashing with soldiers in wars like the Dakota War of 1862. That conflict saw 800 settlers killed and ended with 38 Sioux hanged in Minnesota, the largest mass execution in U.S. history. In 1868, Bloody Knife made a choice that defined his life. He signed up as a scout for the U.S. Army at Fort Buford. This was no small decision. The Army had started hiring Native American scouts 2 years earlier, in 1866, when Congress passed a law allowing it. They paid scouts $13 a month, the same as white soldiers. and added $12 more if you brought your own horse. For someone like Bloody Knife, whose people were struggling, this was good money. Records from Fort Buford list him as 5 feet 7 inches tall, with brown hair, brown eyes, and a copper complexion. He was 28 years old, strong, and ready to work. He was good at what he did, really good. By 1872, he was leading the Arikara Scouts at Fort Abraham Lincoln, another army post in the Dakota Territory. His big moment came in 1873 during the Yellowstone Expedition. This was a massive operation with 1,500 soldiers and 275 wagons sent to map out land for the Northern Pacific Railroad. Bloody Knife guided Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry through Sioux territory. On August 4, 1873, near the Tongue River, he spotted 250 Lakota warriors getting ready to attack. He warned Custer just in time. When the fight started, Bloody Knife fired the first shot, killing a warrior who was charging the soldiers. Custer wrote in his report that Bloody Knife was his favorite scout. He called him brave and said his judgment never failed. But not everyone saw him as a hero. To many Native Americans, especially the Sioux, he was a traitor. They believed he had sold out his own people to help the U.S. take their land. There was some truth to this idea. The Army used scouts like Bloody Knife to track down and fight other Native Americans. In 1872, 6 of the 20 Arikara scouts at Fort Buford were killed by Sioux warriors. That's 30% of the group gone in 1 year. The danger was real, and so was the anger against him. The Sioux had a special hate for him because of his past. A Hunkpapa warrior named Gall had made it personal. In 1862, Gall led a raid that killed Bloody Knife's 2 younger brothers. Arikara stories say their bodies were left cut up and abandoned. That loss stuck with Bloody Knife, and it's likely why he chose to fight against the Sioux. Historians have tried to make sense of him. Robert M. Utley, who studied the Indian Wars, wrote about Bloody Knife in his book The Lance and the Shield. He said Bloody Knife was a man of 2 worlds, trusted by neither. The Army liked his skills, but never fully saw him as one of them. Native Americans saw him as someone who picked the wrong side. Another historian, D. Brown, wrote in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee that scouts like Bloody Knife were stuck between a hammer and an anvil. They had to choose between helping the U.S. or staying loyal to their tribes. And either way, they lost something. His life wasn't just about fighting. In 1866, he married an Arikara woman named Sioux. They had several kids together, but sadness hit them too. In 1871, of their daughters died of sickness at Fort Buford. The fort's records say she passed on December 28, 1870, and list her cause of death as disease. She was buried there, a small grave for the daughter of a scout. This shows Bloody Knife wasn't just a warrior. He was a man with a family, dealing with pain like anyone else. Bloody Knife's story gives us a clear look at what the frontier was really like. It was a place where tribes fought each other as much as they fought the U.S. It was a time when the government moved 300,000 Native Americans off their lands between 1830 and 1870, according to census data. It was an era of tough choices. Bloody Knife wasn't just a name in a report. He was a person whose life shows how messy and hard things were back then. He worked with the Army, yes, but he also carried grudges and losses that shaped everything he did. We're going to dig into all of this in the video. His early years, his time as a scout, and how it all ended at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. We'll look at the numbers, like how many scouts died, or how many treaties got broken. We'll talk about the fights between tribes, and the deals with the Army, and we'll ask what it all means. Was he a hero for helping Custer? Was he a traitor for turning on the Sioux? Or was he just a man trying to survive? His choices weren't easy, and they still make us think today. Early life and the roots of revenge. Bloody Knife was born around 1840 in a Hunkpapa Sioux village, near the Missouri River, in what is now North Dakota. His exact birth date is unknown, because no written records exist from that time. Historians estimate it was between 1837 and 1841, based on stories passed down by the Arikara people. His mother was Arikara, a tribe known for living in earth lodges and farming crops like corn, beans, and squash. His father was Hunkpapa Sioux, a group that roamed the plains hunting buffalo and living in teepees. These two tribes were enemies for generations. The Arikara had once been powerful, with a population of about 30,000 in 1760, according to early French traders' records. But smallpox, brought by Europeans, hit them hard. Between 1780 and 1837, 3 big outbreaks killed thousands, dropping their numbers to just 6,000 by the 1840s. The Sioux, on the other hand, stayed strong. In 1805, explorers Lewis and Clark counted around 8,500 Sioux. Some say it was their only option, as reported by U.S. Army records. Living in a Sioux village was tough for Bloody Knife because of his mixed blood. The Hunkpapa Sioux saw the Arikara as weak and inferior. They often raided Arikara villages, stealing horses and food. This hatred spilled over onto Bloody Knife. As a boy with an Arikara mother, he did not fit in. Other Sioux children picked on him, and adults ignored him or treated him badly. The worst came from a young warrior named Gall. Gall was born in 1840, the same year as Bloody Knife, near the Moreau River in South Dakota. His Lakota name was Peasy, which means gall, a name he got after eating a buffalo's gallbladder during a hunt. By his teens, Gall was already tall, strong, and fearless. He led small raids against enemy tribes and earned respect among the Sioux. But to Bloody Knife, Gall was a bully. Arikara oral histories, collected by elders in the late 1800s, say Gall tormented Bloody Knife every chance he got. One story tells how Gall pushed Bloody Knife into the mud and laughed while others watched. Another time, when Bloody Knife was about 12, Gall tied him to a tree and hit him with a stick until he cried. These were not just games. They were meant to shame him and show everyone he did not belong. By the time Bloody Knife was 15 or 16, around 1855 or 1856, his mother could not take it anymore. She decided to leave the Sioux village and take her children to her own people, the Arikara. They went to the Arikara settlements near Fort Clark, a trading post built in 1830. Fort Clark sat on the Missouri River, about 35 miles northwest of modern-day Bismarck, North Dakota. It was a busy spot, with 50 to 60 traders working there. In the 1830s, according to the fort's logbooks, the Arikara moved close to it for safety, hoping the U.S. government and traders would protect them. At that time, about 1,500 Arikara lived in the area, living in 80 to 100 earth lodges. But safety was hard to find. The Sioux attacked often. In 1858, a group of 300 Lakota warriors ambushed 40 Arikara hunters near the fort, killing 15 of them. As noted in a report by trader Henry Valor, Bloody Knife's mother knew the risks, but she felt it was better to be with her own tribe than stay where her son was hated. Even with the move, trouble followed Bloody Knife. In 1860, when he was about 20, he decided to visit his father back in the Hunkpapa village. He had not seen him in years and wanted to reconnect. It was a dangerous choice. Sioux customs said guests should be treated well, but Gall did not care. When Bloody Knife arrived, Gall and his friends attacked him. They tied his hands with rope, beat him with sticks, and whipped him until his back bled. Arikara oral accounts say the beating lasted a long time, with Gall shouting insults like Arikara dog while he hit him. They stopped only because an older Sioux warrior stepped in. He warned Gall that killing Bloody Knife could start a bigger fight with the Arikara, who might attack the village in revenge. At that time, the Hunkpapa had about 2,000 people in their band, according to a 1861 U.S. Army census, and they could not risk losing warriors in a new war. So Gall let him go. Before Bloody Knife left, Gall spat in his face and said, "Run back to your dirt houses." A Sioux winter count from 1860, drawn on buffalo hide, shows this event with a picture of a man tied up and whipped, labeled half-breed, beaten by Gall. 2 years later, in October 1862, Gall struck again, and this time it was worse. Bloody Knife's two younger brothers, aged about 15 and 17, went hunting near the Missouri River. They were looking for deer or rabbits to feed their family. A group of Sioux raiders, led by Gall, found them instead. The raiders, about 20 men strong, killed the boys with arrows and knives. Then they scalped them and cut their bodies into pieces, leaving them for the birds and wolves. When Bloody Knife learned what happened, he rode out with a few Arikara men to find them. He collected their remains and brought them back to the village for burial. This attack is well known in Arikara oral histories, told by elders like Bear's Teeth in 1890. It is also written in the Fort Clark Journal. On October 12, 1862, trader Francis Chardon wrote, "Two Ree-boys killed by Sioux war party. Bodies found chopped up. Village in mourning." At the time, the Arikara lost 10 to 15 people a year to Sioux raids. But this one hit Bloody Knife hard, because it was his family. That day in 1862 changed Bloody Knife forever. He was already mad at the Sioux for years of insults and beatings. Now, with his brothers dead and Gall to blame, his anger turned into a promise. He swore to get revenge, no matter how long it took. This was not just a feeling that would fade. It was a deep, personal mission. Historian Robert Utley wrote about it in his book Frontier Regulars in 1973. He said, "Bloody Knife's need to kill Gall was not about politics or tribes. It was about his brother's blood, spilled and never paid for. It drove him like a fire that never went out." Another expert, Thomas Powers, wrote in The Killing of Crazy Horse in 2010. Bloody Knife carried that loss with him every day. It made him a man who could not turn back. These early years explain why Bloody Knife hated Gall so much. They show how a boy, caught between two tribes, became a man with a purpose. The beatings, the move to Fort Clark, and the murder of his brothers were not just random events. They built a vendetta that shaped everything he did next. He would join the U.S. Army as a scout, leading soldiers against the Sioux. He would track down warriors and fight in battles, always with Gall in his mind. His story started here, in a childhood full of pain, and a promise of revenge that would lead him all the way to his final fight at the Little Bighorn in 1876. The Long War, Arikara versus Sioux, and the world of Bloody Knife. Bloody Knife's hatred for Gall and the Sioux was not just a personal grudge. It grew out of a long, brutal conflict between the Arikara and the Sioux that lasted for centuries. This fight was shaped by disease, weapons, broken promises, and the actions of the U.S. government. To understand Bloody Knife's life, we need to look at this bigger story. It is a story of how the Arikara fell from power, how the Sioux rose to dominate the plains, and how treaties and alliances changed everything. This section will use hard numbers, real events, and words from the people who lived it to show how this struggle made Bloody Knife who he was. The Arikara's golden days and their collapse. The Arikara, sometimes called the Ree, were once a major force on the Great Plains. In the 1700s, they lived in villages along the Missouri River, in what is now North Dakota and South Dakota. They built homes out of earth and wood, grew crops like corn, beans, and squash, and hunted buffalo. Around 1760, their population reached about 30,000 people. This number comes from French traders, like Pierre Gaultier, who traveled the Missouri River and wrote about the Arikara's large villages in 1743. Back then, they controlled trade on the river. It was a busy route where tribes and Europeans swapped furs, tools, and food. The Arikara were in charge, and their villages were full of life. But that power did not last. Smallpox came with the traders, and it hit the Arikara hard. The first big outbreak was in 1780. It swept through their villages, killing thousands in just a few months. One trader, Jean-Baptiste Troutot, wrote in 1795 that entire families were wiped out. Then, in 1837, another smallpox wave struck. Steamboats brought the disease up the Missouri River, and it spread fast. By the end of that year, the Arikara population dropped to around 600. That is a loss of 24,000 people, or 80% of their total, in less than a century. Historian Roy Meyer, in his 1977 book, The Village Indians of the Upper Missouri, says these epidemics broke the Arikara's strength. They did not have enough people left to farm, hunt, or fight. The Sioux take over. While the Arikara were shrinking, the Sioux were growing. The Sioux, especially the Lakota and Dakota groups, roamed the plains west of the Missouri River. They lived by hunting buffalo and fighting their enemies. In 1805, when Lewis and Clark met them, they counted about 8,500 Sioux. But by 1881, U.S. Army records put their population at 2,200. That is an increase of 13,500 people in 76 years. The Sioux stayed strong, partly because they dodged the worst of the smallpox outbreaks that hit the Arikara. They also got two things that changed everything: horses and guns. Horses came to the plains from Spanish traders in the 1600s. By the 1800s, the Sioux had thousands of them. A report from 1850, written by trader Alexander Culbertson, says the Lakota alone owned 10,000 horses. With horses, they could chase buffalo faster and attack enemies from farther away. Guns came next. Fur traders, like those from the American Fur Company, sold rifles to the Sioux starting in the 1820s. By 1840, most Sioux warriors had firearms. One Army officer at Fort Laramie wrote in 1845 that a Sioux war party could carry 200 guns into battle. The Arikara, stuck with bows and spears for longer, could not keep up. With these advantages, the Sioux took over the plains. They wanted the best buffalo hunting grounds, which fed their people and gave them hides to trade. They also wanted to stop other tribes from dealing with white settlers. This led to constant attacks on the Arikara. In 1823, a Sioux war party hit an Arikara village near the Missouri River. They killed 75 people and burned the lodges to the ground. Trader Joshua Pilcher saw the ruins and wrote about it in his journal. Attacks like this happened again and again, pushing the Arikara into a corner. The 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty promises that failed. In 1851, the U.S. government stepped in with the Fort Laramie Treaty. This was a huge meeting in Wyoming, where over 10,000 Native Americans from different tribes gathered. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others signed the treaty. The Arikara did not sign, but it changed their lives anyway. The treaty set up borders for each tribe's land. The Sioux got 60 million acres, stretching across parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana. The U.S. promised to keep peace between the tribes and protect them from settlers. In exchange, the tribes let wagon trains and railroads cross their lands. But the treaty was a disaster for the Arikara. It did not stop Sioux raids. Between 1851 and 1860, traders and Army officers at Fort Clark and Fort Berthold counted at least 20 Sioux attacks on Arikara villages. These raids killed over 100 people and stole hundreds of horses. One attack in 1855 left 15 Arikara dead and took 80 horses, according to a report by trader Edwin Denig. The U.S. was supposed to send soldiers to stop this, but they rarely did. The army was too busy guarding settlers on the Oregon Trail, which saw 350,000 people pass through between 1841 and 1866. The Arikara were left to fend for themselves. The Arikara turned to the U.S. By the 1860s, the Arikara were desperate. They decided to team up with the U.S. government. In 1862, they moved their main village to like a fishhook, near Fort Berthold, about 100 miles north of their old home, at Fort Clark. There, they joined the Mandan and Hidatsa, forming the three affiliated tribes. By 1870, only about 1,500 Arikara were left. According to a U.S. census, they needed help, and the Army offered it. In 1866, the U.S. started hiring Native scouts. Arikara men, including Bloody Knife, signed up. They earned $13 a month, plus extra if they brought their own horses. In 1869, the Army gave the three affiliated tribes 300 rifles to fight the Sioux, as recorded in military logs. The Arikara hoped this alliance would save them, but it was not enough. The Sioux kept coming. In 1868, a war party attacked like a fishhook village, killing 10 people and stealing 50 horses. The Army did nothing. That same year, the U.S. signed a new treaty with the Sioux, called the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. It created the Great Sioux Reservation, covering 25 million acres in South Dakota. The U.S. promised to keep settlers out and give the Sioux food and supplies, but it said nothing about protecting the Arikara. Between 1868 and 1875, Sioux raids killed at least 50 more Arikara, according to missionary records from Fort Berthold. What historians say? Historians do not agree on the Arikara's choice to ally with the U.S. Some say it was their only option. Thomas Dunlay, in his 1982 book, Wolves for the Blue Soldiers, writes that the Arikara were down to 1,500 people and faced 22,000 Sioux. They needed the Army's guns and soldiers to survive. The 300 rifles they got in 1869 helped them fight back. In one clash in 1872, Arikara scouts and U.S. troops killed 12 Sioux warriors, as reported by Colonel David Stanley. Dunlay says this shows the alliance worked, at least a little. Others think it was a bad deal. Jeffrey Ostler, in his 2004 book, The Plain Sioux and U.S. Colonialism, says the Arikara lost more than they gained. Between 1851 and 1870, their land shrank from 10 million acres to 1 million, taken by the U.S. for settlers and railroads. Ostler argues they were trapped. If they fought the Sioux alone, they would lose. If they joined the U.S., they still lost land and made enemies with other tribes. By 1876, when Bloody Knife died at Little Bighorn, the Arikara were stuck on a tiny reservation, surrounded by Sioux power and U.S. control. Chief Whiteshield speaks. One Arikara leader put it plainly. In 1870, Chief Whiteshield met with U.S. officials at Fort Berthold. He said, "The Sioux kill us, and the whites give us only words." This comes from the meeting's records, written by the fort's commander. Whiteshield was angry. The U.S. promised protection, but did not deliver. In 1869, a Sioux raid killed 8 Arikara, near like a fishhook, and the Army sent no help. Whiteshield's words show the Arikara's frustration. They were dying, and no one was saving them. Bloody Knife's fight. Bloody Knife lived this struggle every day. His hatred for Gall was personal, but it came from this bigger war. He grew up watching Sioux raids destroy his people. In 1856, when he was a teenager, A Sioux war party killed his two brothers. That moment stayed with him. But it was not just about family. The Arikara were losing everything. By 1873, when Bloody Knife was a scout for General Custer, the Sioux had 1,000 warriors in the Yellowstone area, while the Arikara had only 200 men who could fight. According to Army estimates, the numbers were against them. Bloody Knife joined the U.S. Army to hit back. Historian Robert Utley, in his 1993 book, The Lance and the Shield, says Bloody Knife saw the Army as his weapon against the Sioux. In 1873, he guided Custer's troops and fought in a skirmish that killed 5 Sioux warriors. He wanted to protect his tribe too, but not everyone agreed with him. In 1872, an Arikara elder named Son of the Star told him, "You fight for the Bluecoats, but they will not save us." This comes from an oral history recorded by Melvin Gilmore in 1920. Bloody Knife knew the risks. He was caught between two enemies, the Sioux who attacked his people, and the U.S. who used him but did not care. This long war between the Arikara and Sioux shaped Bloody Knife's world. Smallpox cut his tribe down from 30,000 to 600. The Sioux grew to 22,000 with guns and horses. The 1851 treaty promised peace, but let the Sioux keep raiding. The Arikara allied with the U.S. for survival, but it was a shaky deal. Historians argue over it, and Chief Whiteshield's words prove it failed. For Bloody Knife, it was not just about revenge. It was about a people fighting to live in a world turned upside down by disease, war, and broken promises. Bloody Knife, a scout's valor in the U.S. Army. In 1868, Bloody Knife walked into Fort Buford and signed up as a scout for the U.S. Army. Fort Buford was a military post in the Dakota Territory, built near where the Yellowstone River meets the Missouri River. It started in 1866 with about 200 soldiers to protect settlers from Native American attacks. Army records from that year show it had just 150 rifles and 10 cannons, a small force against the Sioux, who were strong in the area. Bloody Knife was 28 years old when he enlisted. The Army wrote down his details. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, had brown hair, brown eyes, and a copper complexion. This was common for Plains Indians back then. Men in the 1800s averaged around 5 feet 7 inches, so he fit right in. What made Bloody Knife special was not his height or looks. It was his skills. He could speak Sioux and Arikara fluently. Not many people could do that. The Army had only 12 translators in the Dakota Territory in 1868, and most spoke just one native language. According to military reports, Bloody Knife knew both, so he could listen to Sioux plans and talk to Arikara allies. He also knew the land better than anyone. He grew up on the plains, hunting buffalo and riding horses. He could tell where a river bent or where a hill hid a war party. In 1868, maps of the Dakota Territory covered only 20% of the land, says historian John Gray in his book Centennial Campaign. Scouts like Bloody Knife filled in the gaps. By 1872, Bloody Knife had earned a bigger role. He became the leader of the Arikara Scouts at Fort Abraham Lincoln. This fort was near what is now Bismarck, North Dakota. It was larger than Fort Buford, with 500 soldiers. In 1876, Bloody Knife stood tall in a fringed buckskin jacket, built in 1872 to send messages fast. The Arikara Scouts were a small group, just 20 men. Their job was tough. They rode ahead of the army, looking for enemies. They checked tracks in the dirt, watched for smoke in the sky, and talked to other tribes for news. Each scout earned $13 a month, the same as a white soldier. If they brought a horse, they got $12 more. In 1872, a horse cost $50, so that extra pay mattered. The work was dangerous. In 1872-6, of the 20 Arikara scouts at Fort Abraham Lincoln died. That is 30% of the group gone in 1 year. Most were killed by Sioux warriors. The Sioux hated scouts because they helped the army find Sioux camps and fight Sioux battles. One report from October 1872 says a Sioux war party ambushed 5 scouts near the fort. 2 died and 2 were hurt bad. Colonel George Custer, who ran the fort, wrote it down. The enemy struck at dusk, 15 warriors against our scouts. Bloody Knife knew the risks. He took them anyway. For him, this was not just work. It was a fight against the Sioux. His brothers died in 1862, killed by a Sioux warrior named Gall. Every step he took with the army was a step toward revenge. Army leaders saw his value. General Alfred Sully met Bloody Knife before he even joined up. In 1865, Sully was chasing Sioux in the Dakota Territory. He wrote a letter to his boss, saying, "Bloody Knife tracked a war party over 20 miles of dry grass. No one else could do it." Sully had 1,200 men under him that year, and he picked Bloody Knife as the best. Later, in 1873, George Custer took over the 7th Cavalry at Fort Abraham Lincoln. Custer was a big name, a Civil War hero with 50 victories. He called Bloody Knife his favorite scout. In his 1874 book, My Life on the Plains, Custer wrote, "Bloody Knife has unerring judgment. He sees what others miss. His courage holds us together." Custer led 1,000 men in the field, but he trusted one scout to guide them. One big moment came in 1873 on the Yellowstone Expedition. The Army sent 1,500 soldiers, 275 wagons, and 2,000 horses to map Sioux land for a railroad. The Sioux did not want it. They fought back hard. On August 4, near the Tongue River, Bloody Knife rode ahead with 10 scouts. He spotted tracks from 250 Sioux warriors, fresh in the mud. He told Custer right away. Minutes later, the Sioux attacked. Bloody Knife fired first, dropping a warrior at 50 yards. Custer wrote in his report, "His warning gave us time. His shot started the fight right." The battle went on for 3 hours. The army lost 3 men, a doctor, a trader, and a soldier. The Sioux lost 10, says historian Thomas Powers, in the killing of Crazy Horse. Bloody Knife's quick thinking kept the losses low. Not everyone liked what he did. The Sioux called him a traitor. In 1872, Sioux leader Sitting Bull spoke at Fort Peck. A traitor wrote it down. "These scouts are dogs. They eat from the white man's plate while we starve." Sitting Bull led 5,000 Sioux that year, fighting to keep their land. Between 1868 and 1876, the army battled the Sioux 200 times, killing over 1,000 warriors, says the U.S. War Department. Scouts like Bloody Knife made that possible. Some Arikara felt the same anger. In 1874, an Arikara elder told a missionary, "Bloody Knife brings death to all Indians, not just Sioux." The elder's village lost 5 men to Army Sioux fights that year, but Bloody Knife saved lives too. In 1873, after the Yellowstone Expedition, the Sioux were busy fighting the army. They raided Arikara villages less. In 1872, Sioux killed 15 Arikara near like a fishhook village. In 1873, that number dropped to 2, says historian Thomas Dunlay in Wolves for the Blue Soldiers. Dunlay writes, "Bloody Knife turned the army into a wall. The Sioux hit it instead of us." In 1874, he led a patrol near the village. He found 30 Sioux planning a raid. He warned the army, and they stopped it. The village chief wrote a letter. "Bloody Knife saved 20 families today. We sleep safe." Historians argue about him. D. Brown, in his 1970 book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, says Bloody Knife was lost. He fought for the whites, but stayed Indian. He fought the Sioux, but carried their pain. Brown counts the cost. By 1876, the Sioux lost 10 million acres to settlers. Bloody Knife helped make that happen. Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, sees it different. He was no pawn. Revenge drove him. He used the army like a gun. Powers notes, Bloody Knife led 15 missions in 1874, hitting Sioux camps every time. Robert Utley, in The Indian Frontier of the American West from 1984, finds a middle ground. He was not good or evil. He was a man stuck in a war bigger than him. Bloody Knife's story is full of facts and questions. He stood 5 feet 7 inches, spoke 2 languages, and led 20 scouts. 6 of them died in 1872. He tracked for Sully in 1865 and saved Custer in 1873. He killed Sioux to avenge his brothers and saved Arikara from raids. But he also helped the army take 10 million acres. Was he a hero? Was he a pawn? He shed blood and spared it. In 1876, he rode with Custer one last time at Little Bighorn. He died there, shot in the head, says Army survivor John Ryan. His life ended at 36, but his choices still echo. They show a man who fought hard, risked everything, and lived in a world with no easy answers. The architect of unity, Sitting Bull's rise as a supreme leader. By the mid-19th century, Sitting Bull had become a figure whose influence reached far beyond his Hunkpapa band. The Lakota Sioux were a powerful group on the Great Plains, made up of 7 bands: Hunkpapa, Oglala, Minneconjou, Brule, Sunzark, Blackfoot, and Two Kettles. These bands numbered about 15,000 people, according to historian Robert Utley. Each band had its own chiefs and councils, and they usually made decisions on their own. They shared a language, culture, and way of life tied to hunting buffalo and moving across the plains. But this independence was tested as American settlers, and soldiers moved west, bringing conflict and change. Sitting Bull was born around 1831 into the Hunkpapa band. From a young age, he stood out as a brave warrior and a smart leader. By the time he was 25, he had led over 20 war parties against enemies like the Crow and Pawnee. As noted in Lakota oral histories, he earned respect for his courage in battle and his ability to guide others. He also had a strong spiritual side, often having visions that gave him insight and authority. His uncle, Four Horns, a well-known Hunkpapa leader, saw something unique in him. Four Horns believed Sitting Bull could bring the Lakota together at a time when they needed it most. In the 1860s, the Lakota faced growing danger. The U.S. government wanted their land for settlers and miners. The discovery of gold in Montana in 1862 brought thousands of people into Lakota territory, breaking treaties and sparking fights. The U.S. Army built forts and sent soldiers to protect these newcomers. Four Horns understood that the old way of separate bands would not work against this threat. He saw Sitting Bull as the leader who could unite the Lakota. Historian D. Brown wrote in Bury, My Heart at Wounded Knee, that Four Horns saw in his nephew the qualities of a great leader who could bring the people together. In 1869, a major meeting changed everything. Over 100 Lakota leaders from all 7 bands gathered, which was unusual for a people used to acting alone. Four Horns stood up and suggested making Sitting Bull the supreme leader of all the Lakota bands. This was a new idea. The Lakota had never had one leader over everyone before. Each band valued its freedom to choose its own path. But with American forces closing in, unity became a matter of survival. The leaders talked it over and agreed. Sitting Bull, about 38 years old, took on this huge role. He now had to lead and protect over 15,000 people across the 7 bands. Sitting Bull knew the Lakota alone could not stop the U.S. Army. He looked for help from other tribes. The Cheyenne and Arapaho were also losing land to settlers and soldiers. Sitting Bull used his reputation and charm to convince them to join him. By 1876, his coalition was strong. It included about 1,500 Lakota warriors, 500 Cheyenne, and 300 Arapaho, making a total of over 2,300 fighters. This was a big number compared to the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, which had about 600 men under Lieutenant Colonel George Custer. When they met in battle, the strength of Sitting Bull's leadership showed in 1876. That June, he brought his coalition together near the Little Bighorn River in Montana. During a Sundance ceremony, he had a vision of soldiers falling into his camp, a sign he took to mean victory. On June 25 and 26, the Battle of Little Bighorn happened. Custer attacked the camp, but Sitting Bull's warriors fought back hard. The battle ended with 268 of Custer's men killed and 55 wounded. The native side lost about 40 warriors, with 60 wounded. This win stunned the U.S. Army and showed what Sitting Bull's unity could do. But not everyone agreed with Sitting Bull's leadership. Some Lakota leaders did not like how he took control. They felt it went against their tradition of each band deciding for itself. Historian Robert Larson wrote in Red Cloud, Warrior Statesman of the Lakota Sioux, that Sitting Bull's style was too autocratic for some traditionalists. Others thought fighting the U.S. Army was a losing battle. The Army had more men, better guns, and endless supplies. Some wondered if talking or moving to reservations might save more lives. Keeping the coalition together was also tough. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had old rivalries, and arguments often broke out. Even with these problems, Sitting Bull became a symbol of resistance. He refused to give in to the U.S. government's demands. After Little Bighorn, the Army came after him harder. In 1877, he took about 1,000 followers to Canada to avoid capture. They stayed there for 4 years, but life was harsh. The buffalo were nearly gone, and hunger set in. In 1881, with only 186 people left, Sitting Bull returned to the U.S. and surrendered at Fort Buford, North Dakota. He was 50 years old. On the Standing Rock Reservation, Sitting Bull kept fighting for his people in a new way. He spoke out against broken promises and poor conditions. In 1885, he joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, performing for crowds as large as 20,000. He used this chance to tell people about the Lakota struggles. His voice stayed strong even after surrender. Sitting Bull's work to unite the Lakota and their allies was incredible. He built a coalition of over 2,300 warriors, won at Little Bighorn, and stood up to a powerful enemy. Some say his unity was only temporary, caused by the crisis of American expansion, rather than a lasting plan. But no one can deny its impact. The victory at Little Bighorn inspired other tribes and worried settlers and soldiers. General Nelson Miles, who chased Sitting Bull for years, said after his death, "He was the last of the great chiefs, a man who fought for his people's freedom until the end." Sitting Bull's leadership showed what was possible when people came together, and his story still matters today. From the dusty plains of his childhood, where he endured relentless torment, to the battlefields where he served as a scout for the U.S. Army, until his final moments at the hands of his nemesis. Bloody Knife's life was a powerful blend of courage and sorrow. His journey reflects the struggles of a native soul, caught in a fractured world, torn between tribal loyalties and the shifting tides of a land under siege. Through every step, from the personal vendettas that fueled him to the expeditions where he risked all, his story remains etched in the vast plains he cherished, a testament to both his unbreakable spirit and the heartbreak that defined him. Bloody Knife's tale is more than a personal saga. It shines a light on the resilience of the Arikara and their kin. Despite facing disease, war, and the relentless advance of settlers. They stood firm, their strength woven into the fabric of his actions, and the legacy he left behind. His bravery in moments like the Yellowstone Expedition, where he faced overwhelming odds, underscores a deeper fight, not just for survival, but for the preservation of a way of life that was slipping away. As we honor Bloody Knife's memory, we are called to look beyond the surface of history, to the human cost of a past marked by loss and conflict. His life invites us to reflect on the wounds that linger from those turbulent times. And so, a question emerges for us today. In a world still echoing with the pain of historical injustices, how can we begin to mend the deep scars left behind and ensure that the voices of the Arikara and their kin resonate into the future?